was this do not resuscitate form that my parents had to sign. There's no way I would have survived.
So at what point were you admitted to hospital? How far in?
21. Obviously, I passed out at home in the kitchen, and they had like a marble floor, so smacked my head. I just remember getting up, I remember falling, and then I remember waking up in hospital, and I had like potassium in one arm, phosphate in the other. So phosphate's like your electrolyte to kickstart.
They're giving you intravenous food, basically.
And obviously, So I was, I when I came to, obviously I had the doctors around me, and then there was this form that my parents had to sign, which was a do not resuscitate form. So I was 5.5 stone at 21. So I think we worked it's about 40 kg at 6'4". So in terms of circling the drain, probably I was obviously, it didn't bother me. Like I had the doctor saying to me, like, if you don't change, you were literally going to die. You're going to go into cardiac arrest. Your heart's going to stop, and we're not even going to try and revive you. I got my parents like almost like shaking me with like, what more do you want to be told? And it was just like I've never ever had a feeling of wanting to die. Never wanted to end it. But obviously, ultimately, what I was doing was like a really slow suicide. But I think it was more the fact that I'd become so used to this destructive cycle that it was my identity now. Like I said, going back to that Stockholm syndrome, if I get rid of the eating disorder, what have I got? Because I've got this shit life. So at least with an eating disorder, I'm James with the eating disorder. I get rid of it, I got nothing. So obviously after I spent like a week in hospital on these drips, and then I was never sectioned under the Mental Health Act. It was you either go to the eating disorder unit on a voluntary basis or we'll section you. So it was like, don't really have a choice. So I went.
Had you put some weight on during this week in hospital? It doesn't fatten you up?
No. It was more the like phosphate and potassium. It was more just the nutrients and stuff that I needed. In terms of like, there was no real. Obviously, I was fed, but I don't really think that wasn't really making a bit of difference. But yeah, so I went into an eating disorder unit for 6 months. But because again, I was the only, throughout the whole 10 years, I was the only guy I ever interacted with, barring therapists. There was no other guys that had an eating disorder. So I couldn't be an inpatient, I had to be a day patient, so I had to be there at 7, leave at 7. So that was like my routine for 6 months. And it was then that they kind of reintroduced me to, I learned how to eat again at like 22, which it sounds so bizarre, but I think it's just obviously the nature of what I was doing. For nearly 5 years, I wasn't eating anything. So I needed that control taken away. Control's massive with an eating disorder. So I was basically fed on a table like this, fed and then monitored. So I couldn't leave the table until I've eaten it. I couldn't leave the table for like an hour after eating it because of going to the toilet or whatever. And you literally just had, it was almost like a scene out of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So had all these nurses watching you with like clipboards, writing things down. And you think like now with that, I don't know if the practices still work, but obviously again, it worked for me because that control was completely taken away. Eat that, you're staying there. You're not doing anything until we feel that you can't do anything off your own back. And then it was obviously doing therapy as well, with like psychotherapists trying to understand the root causes of everything, and that didn't go well for me. The therapists I had weren't the best. The first therapy session I ever had, I had a guy telling me, "Oh, this is a new one for me. I've never worked with a guy before. This is normally a woman's problem." You imagine that. You got a guy saying that to you, and it was obviously at the time it was like I never even entered my head about other guys. I just thought you don't really have that perspective on things. Like, who else has got it? Is it a man? Is it a woman? Like, you don't. So when they told me that, it was like, well, why me? Like, why am I the only guy this guy's known? Thinking about it, why am I the only guy here? Like,
and what are the stats on bulimia and anorexia and like nowadays in terms of percentage of people have it or number of people that are affected?
It's still predominantly women, but the increase in men, especially like post lockdown, has been massive, especially with bulimia. Obviously, it's kind of classed now as as a stress. It's almost like induced by stress. It's another way of. It's a negative coping mechanism. Obviously, some people do that as again, it all depends on how you're wired and what your background is and what your personality is. Some people will binge drink. Some people will take drugs. Some people will excessively exercise. Obviously, some people they get so worked up with stress that it's almost like they've got to get something out. And obviously, if they've just eaten and they feel that release, that's when that negative cycle can then start, because there's almost like there's a comfort to that. That's relieved my stress. It's like it hasn't. It's like a fake release of stress. You haven't relieved it. You just feel it because something's coming up. Therefore, that has to be the stress you're dealing with, and then you get into that cycle of self-sabotage, and that's how easy you can get into these.
And can people have like part-time bulimia, or is it either on or off? Do you know what I mean? Like you puke up 2 or 3 days a week, and you're not on the other days.
I think it's like I'm trying to make it easy for other people to understand. It's like you can be a full-on alcoholic, and you can be a functioning alcoholic. You can be a functioning bulimic. You can do. Obviously, if you remember John Prescott,
yeah,
the MP, obviously he suffered with it, and obviously people took the piss out of him because he was quite a big man, and obviously he did it, and obviously his reaction or his trigger was stress. So you can, and obviously it just depends on. I guess it depends on what areas you have in your life that can keep you focused in other ways. Like if you've got nothing, if you don't have a family, you don't have a partner, you don't have a job, you don't have any other things, in reality you're fucked, because it's just going to keep you in that cycle, because it's the only thing you've got. And obviously that's, from my own experience, if that's the only thing you've got, the last thing you're going to want to do is get rid of it, because it's the only thing that gives you any form of identity.